welcome to Iowa Stages, a podcast about Central Iowa Theater from the Iowa Stage Theater Company. I'm Matthew McIver, the Artistic Director of the Iowa Stage Theater Company, here with my co-host, Shawn Wilson.
Hello, everybody, and our fine producer and handsomely rugged man, Kyle Bochart.
That's the advantage of doing it just audio. We all look very, very good.
Kyle looks great. That's all I'm going to say.
We are very excited to have with us tonight two of the folks who are working on Iowa Stage's production of Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, and I'll have them introduce themselves and say what their engagement with the project is. Jennifer, can we start with you?
I'm Jennifer Nostrala, and I am the director for the production.
I am Tiffany Flory, and I'm playing Nora in the production.
And I should also say I'm also in the production, and I'm playing Dr. Rank. Although people don't want me to be in the production, apparently.
Everyone wants you to be in the production.
No, I'm not getting those vibes from this side of the table. They were like, "Oh, I was going to have a night away from him, and here he is again."
Well, yeah, we drag everybody in for podcasting.
Sure.
So thank you so much for doing this. We should say that we're recording this at the Stoner Theater backstage, as actually tech is continuing.
Real backstage, real backstage.
The backstage of backstage.
Back.
So far back, it's almost front of house.
Right. We're almost on the street. That's how far back.
Circles back around again.
Yeah.
And we are teching both of these shows. We're doing, Iowa Stage is doing A Doll's House and A Doll's House 2 in repertory, only the second theater to play these two together. Lucas Nath's A Doll's House Part 2, obviously, is the sequel to Henrik Ibsen's 1879 masterpiece, A Doll's House, celebrating its 140th anniversary. What 140 is what, Sean? Is that microchips or blood diamonds? What's the 140th anniversary gift?
The gift. Oh, yeah. I think it's a camel. I don't know.
Camels for your 140th anniversary.
I'm lucky if I'm in any relationship to last longer than 2 years. So
you get up to paper.
Oh, do you? I don't know. I get up to paper and then I'm done. That's it. Because who wants to buy more than paper? Sorry,
we're wandering far afield. Kyle will edit us out.
Paper's readily available. Is all I'm saying.
So, A Doll's House, obviously. Now, there's a concept that I was talking about with someone recently, the concept of something that I call theater famous, which is something that's incredibly famous to theater people, and the vast majority of people have no idea what it is. Henrik Ibsen, I think, is one of the most theater famous people in the world. He's a hugely influential Norwegian playwright, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Or they've seen the play and never heard of it.
Yeah,
or never saw it. They've heard the play, never seen it.
Yeah, right.
That's the right way to say that.
Yeah, and theater famous can be like, people are like, oh, we're doing Tartuffe, and normal people are like, okay.
So, yeah. Right.
But, played by Moliere, for those of you who can Google it. That's a wonderful thing. But A Doll's House is, according to Zappy.com or some website I was looking at, one of the 10 most famous plays in the Western canon.
Zappy.com?
I made the website
Are you pitching? Are they sponsoring us?
No, I wish.
Zappy? Okay.
Zappy, you can find my contact info on the website.
Sounds legitimate.
And one of the most famous plays in the Western canon, hugely influential play. Jennifer, Tiffany, when did you guys first encounter A Doll's House? When did you first come across your consciousness? Was it in school? Was it in college? Was it in...
I don't know. Did I teach it to you, Tiffany?
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you taught it to me in college.
Yeah, well, we had an Ibsen class for midterm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, I wasn't in that, but then when I went to grad school, we actually studied in every year. So in the spring semester, we did a Henrik Ibsen and Chekhov class. So we focused on Ibsen and Chekhov together as realism, and we would do scenes from that.
Two of the great masters of realism in the
Exactly.
theater, influential in both the style of presentation that they had, and it was a very realistic style. It's a slice of life kind of feel, but also in the subject matter, particularly that Ibsen tackled with The Doll's House. So Jennifer, you were saying we should clarify for those of you who are wondering how you taught it to Tiffany.
She was an instructor just last week. We hooked them up.
That's right. Time for
like
teaching.
A crash course.
So I've been teaching at Simpson College for a long time, and I won't even say the number because it's been a really, really long time. So I had Tiffany and also our producer Kyle in classes
This is part of the glorious thing about Central Iowa Theater is the connections go back decades for a lot of folks. It's really fun. Tiffany, you may have come across it first with Jennifer at Simpson.
Right.
Jennifer, do you remember even the first time you came across A Doll's House?
No, I mean, I think I was probably in college. I don't remember like the moment of it. It's just sort of always been in my consciousness. It's kind of like you just know about it.
Right.
So I don't know when I went, I have read the play for the first time. I've just read it now.
What was your sort of take on Ibsen or on A Doll's House in particular before coming to work on it? Because unless I'm mistaken, this is the first Ibsen you've directed in a long and illustrious directing career.
We keep emphasizing like long and
I wasn't emphasizing.
For the record, I want it to be known I am not emphasizing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're wonderful. You know,
that's a little tally in your.
Sean's kissing up to his director.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's sucking up.
As he should. So, I mean, I've taught it for a long time, and I never directed it. It was directed at Simpson before I started working there, so it was really a long, long time ago.
That wasn't us.
I don't believe you. That's just
all right.
But I was always really fascinated with it, and I would teach it in classes, and what was really interesting to me is that students would get Nora leaves, okay, so there's the spoiler alert.
It's on the website.
But students would get really, really pissed off. They were mad at her for leaving. And this is when I'm teaching it 5 years ago. And I thought, well, what's wrong with you all? She's making a choice. Things are not happy for her.
And what was their perspective? What was their take?
Well, it was that it was a mom leaving her kids.
And they're very young kids, we should say.
Yeah. And that at the bottom line for them, really, they could not forgive her in many ways for that. They said she should have stayed. She should work it out. I guess they want them to have marriage counseling. They thought it was just problematic.
Which was not a significant feature of 1879 Norwegian society. We should just point out
well,
marriage counseling was not involved.
We don't look at anything necessarily from the historical perspective and go, they wouldn't have done it that way then. We go, well, what would we do now? So I think that's how people will still look at this, right? They'll go,
sure.
So she's made the choice to leave. I mean, we have a problem when people are in situations of domestic violence and we either don't know why do they stay, because we could ask Nora, why did she stay for 8 years? Sure. And then when they leave, it's like, well, is that really the right thing? Is he really that bad?
Right.
And I think that's part of what we ask with Torvald. Is he really that bad?
Right.
But I think in this production, he
but
really
I think,
is
honestly,
that bad.
That's the big stumbling block is the kids, right? I think for our society today, I think because otherwise, if the kids weren't involved, I don't think it would have been for our society nowadays. I'm not sure it's quite as big a choice. It's like, okay, yeah, she should just go. She should leave.
Right.
But the kids, that's a different thing. Still,
right.
Yeah,
well, because the assumption would be she would take them with her. Why doesn't she take them with her?
Right. Yeah,
but in that day and age, I mean, she was going to have to fend for herself. She was going to be penniless when she walked out that door. She's not going to have anything.
But this is what I'm thinking about: is that it's such a big decision for us now. Like it's still like a controversial decision to leave the kids. That I can't imagine what it would have been like back then when like the biggest. I mean, the whole play, the whole crux of this play is based on the fact that, like, Nora's not supposed to borrow. Like, women couldn't borrow money. They weren't supposed to have anything to do with money, really, unless it was. They can't take out loans.
Well, married women in particular.
And that hasn't changed. It's been fairly recent past that's changed.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, even in our society.
I guess.
My mom would tell the story of calling about a credit card and them asking to speak with the husband.
Yeah.
And my dad called them and said, "You need to talk to her because I don't deal with any of this. She does." That's not that's less than 50 years ago that was happening.
Sure.
Tiffany, how about you? When you first came across, were you one of the kids in Jennifer's class who were arguing against Nora staying, or were you like, "Go Nora, slam that door"? What was your initial take on A Doll's House and on Nora?
Well, I don't remember having as big of a reaction. I think that I was always Team Nora, and I always kind of felt like she got a bad rep. Because when you actually read the script, I mean, at the time, she honestly kind of feels like maybe she isn't the best person to be raising her children. There's kind of, and especially in this translation, there's kind of this element of where everyone around her is telling her that by lying about, borrowing money for 8 years, like she has potentially corrupted her children, or being a bad person also affects the children.
Right, yeah.
And so there is that element of, well, I mean, at the time, in history, we all thought putting leeches was going to solve the world problems or make you feel better. So, if you're getting told this, and she doesn't quite know about society or the reality of what actually is affecting raising children, she has to figure that out for herself, and that's one reason why she leaves. She decides, I don't know anything, and I've always just been listening to what other people have been telling me and accepting that as truth. But you know what? I need to start over new and decide that for myself. And so she actually has a choice of, well, I'm going to, even just saying goodbye to the kids, she doesn't want to put that kind of burden on her because she knows, well, maybe I've made some poor life choices in the past, and I don't want to affect that to my children, so they're in a better place without them coming with me. Right. And a lot of people, look, like I said, look at that as negative, but, I've actually talked about it with Carrie, who plays Nora in A Doll's House, too. This is actually something that we discussed, where at the moment that she leaves, I believe she left the children for those reasons, thinking, I would be a horrible mother to them because I've done all these things and I could affect them. But she kind of came at it starting Doll's House 2, where after time has passed, it might be a little bit more of a selfish reason that she left to then start that out. But I mean, just because time passes and when you realize, what's going on in those 15 years, so it'll be really interesting to then see how Carrie then takes Nora. But I mean, as far as my initial reaction, I was Team Nora.
Yeah. So taking that, and it's fascinating to me when we do these, Iowa Stage being the child of two parents, RTI, which had to really focus on the classic, Stage West had to really focus on the cutting edge. When we look at these classic plays, 140 years of opinions, 140 years of productions, it's been done, Doll's House has been done constantly for the last century and a half. It's one of the most famous plays. When you came then to shifting out of that, let's read it and talk about it phase into, hey, let's work on it and put it on its feet. I'm curious if anything shifted for you, or if you made discoveries in the play that you hadn't thought of, or if things twisted for you. There's always an intersection, between the actors and the text, which creates an interesting kind of dynamic. I'm just curious, for both of you, did anything shift for you as you were working on it, or?
Well, I make discoveries every time I hear it. I mean, I think it's a fascinating play, and I think it is not dated in any way, even though some of the circumstances might be, because I think it's about people trying to figure out their place in the world. I think she has to leave because she is nothing. She doesn't have any identity. She is without she's a rudderless ship, if we use the shipwreck kind of idea. So she doesn't know who she is. But there are all these things in terms of, we're talking about trust and courage and the impact of money and society and people's expectations for us and who gets to be with who and who can't be with who. I mean, I think it's totally relevant. And so for me, every time we run it, do different scenes, new things come up. So it's always really fresh. And I've particularly noticed in the past few rehearsals how not dated it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also helps that, I think we should mention that the actual translation that we're using was done by Thornton Wilder, which is really, and it's
one
really
of the greatest American playwrights.
Yeah, so he took and just really sculpted it. And, for some, there's a lot of animal references, I think, or like in the original trailer. He kind of got rid of some of that sort of stuff.
Except the bird. You're my little bird at the end, I think, and that's the only thing.
Songbird. I get called Songbird once, and then
that's it. I was telling Jennifer last night that I saw an adaptation of this that was set in India, and he constantly referred to her by food, my little prawn and garlic butter. He called her all these edible things. It was really weird.
Really does not sound appealing at all.
It was really disturbing.
My little prawn in butter?
Prawn in garlic butter.
And garlic butter, even.
So I smelled
I know you said
Gosh.
Now I just wanted to go eat.
So there is, Tiffany, for you, were there any surprises as you've gone on this journey? You were Team Nora, and you're playing Nora, so presumably that hasn't changed. But
every time it's just a little discovery here or there, whether it's why somehow somebody says a line differently, that then it sparks me into an anger, or I've come to find that using the children has really influenced it. So whether it's looking off and just feeling the love of a mother for children, because especially since we have these two absolutely darling children. Ben, who's playing my husband Torvald, his two children are actually playing the children, and they're just the sweetest. So they come out, and you can't help but fall in love with them. So it's so easy. It's so easy just to fall on that.
Which makes it super easy to leave them at the end.
Oh, no, it makes it very hard. But
I'm kidding.
But at the same time, I was going to say near the end it became, it's as opposed to just trying to discover the world, I would say that we've kind of stumbled on her being a lot more strong and almost, he talks to her like a child through most of it. And so kind of turning the tables on him near the end.
He's a real good mansplainer.
Oh, my gosh.
Massive mansplainer.
You want to know something that's that's been an evolution of my thought as we've gone through, especially taking it from the page to actually seeing it. And so I'm playing Dr. Frank, and so I had very small scenes, so mostly I just get a watch. And it occurred to me, I think on my first reading, I was like, I may have been a little bit more in that corner of Torvald's not that bad. I might have been in that Torvald's not that bad corner. I still got why she left, but I also felt bad for Torvald. Yeah. I'm not sure I feel so bad for Torvald anymore. And it's seeing it on its feet, and just it's the way he talks to her. It's so, in
demeaning?
some cases, really super demeaning.
But he's so sincere. He is so convincing.
Yes.
It's like, oh, sweet, my child.
He's not doing it out of spite or out of any kind of animosity or anything. And
it's just the way that he is.
When there are parts where the heat kicks up between you guys, especially towards the end, you're having all that sort of, or when he thinks that he's in big trouble, then it's amped up times 10, and then it's mean, and then it's spiteful. You're like, okay, I get it. Yeah, he's not great. Torvald's not great.
I mean, Ben's performance is fabulous. Yeah. There was actually, I think, moments that it took me by shock, when he was actually up on his feet talking to me, that, I almost had to laugh because it was just so, wow, I didn't realize you were going to be so mean or patronizing, and oh my gosh, that hits in a really, really deep personal level. And
I'll say from an outside perspective, it's all in the text. It's all how it's there.
I just didn't read it that way. For some reason, it was just it doesn't. When you're reading it on the page, it doesn't really come across.
Yeah, but that's also because I think we excuse men for the surface, which is I'm just trying to take care of her. Right. I'm trying to make a good family. Yeah. I'm busy at work. And he has sort of this persona that everybody respects.
For me, no, I get that. For me, it was just even the language. Yeah. Until you hear him say some, I didn't understand. I didn't get the. He calls her a child
all the time,
so much.
All
it's
the time.
So weird.
Or creature.
Creature, yes,
calls
but
her creature constantly, which has an
whole,
oddly Frankensteinian sort of feel.
Father sort of.
Oh, it's
so
totally paternalistic.
Weird.
It's really bizarre. So when she says, "I went from my father's hands to yours," but that's still, that's the wedding ceremony.
Yeah, the
wedding ceremony is, I shall give you my daughter because I'm just passing property from one to the other. So it is paternalistic.
Yeah, and what. So that's a fascinating example of something that's different when you got on stage. And we talked about how it's sort of much more. It's not dated. It has a very fresh feel to it. What do you think people get wrong about this play? What do people not understand about A Doll's House, or what misconceptions do you think people have about this? That now that you've spent time with it in rehearsal, that you've grappled with these characters in a really three-dimensional way.
Well, I think
it's not actually about dolls. Kyle says.
No, it is.
That's true.
I didn't see one Barbie in there.
That's true.
That was really weird.
Nor is there a house.
Right. Well, I think we do. We have little
houses.
I touch
the houses all the
time.
That's
true. That's true.
But,
that's true.
I think it's because we just think it's about the last moment in the damn play. We think it's just about she leaves, and that's what the play's about. And I think what we realize is
it ends in one of the most famous images in theater.
Yeah. But that's not what the whole. that's the end of the play and it's an important image in the play, but I think all the human beings on stage are really important. And one thing that I forgot, because I think you go Torvald, you go Nora, that's all the people, that's all you need. Everybody else is just a plot device, but it's not. I mean, I think what's fascinating is all the other characters that are on there as well that have their own sort of looking for self-actualization, looking for somebody to care about them, needing to have purpose. We have Christina, who she talks about, because I was thinking about this last night, her only happiness is work.
Yeah.
Christina Lynn, played by Emily Davis. We mentioned Ben Sheridan's playing Torvald, and Emilian Adler, his kids, are playing the Helmer's kids in the show. But
Michael Tallman is playing Krogstad.
Yeah, and I think the notion is work gives somebody purpose. So work is about money because we have to survive, and that was a society where money was it was about climbing up, right?
Yep.
But the notion is really work is purpose. And so Christina goes, it made me happy to work because she also had purpose. She was taking care of her. She was busy taking care of people. And so I think Nora's realization is what's her purpose? What's our function in life? And so for me, that is embedded in all of the characters. What is their purpose? What will they leave behind?
Right. Yeah.
So what was their purpose, and then are they only empty space when they're gone?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we're also really looking at, there's a smaller character that's in A Doll's House, but then she becomes a really big character in A Doll's House too, Anne Marie, and she's the nanny to the children. So obviously, when you think of those small interactions with Anne Marie and who she was to Nora, to then 15 years later, she's the one that was actually with the children for those 15 years. Right. And so, I mean, it's a small. You might think it's a small character in A Doll's House, but I'd say you need to watch like her little interactions with Nora to then really that influences a lot of A Doll's House Part 2.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, Iowa Stage Theater Company is doing these two shows in rep on the same set, two very different shows, but Lucas Nath's sequel, A Doll's House Part 2, written 138 years after Ibsen's. And as you say, Anne Marie, who's played by Laura Jordan, becomes an even larger presence in A Doll's House Part 2 because of the consequences of that choice that Nora makes to leave, as we sort of see some of that played out in 2. You don't have to see both of them.
But you should.
You totally should. But you can understand one without the other.
Yeah.
You can understand 2 without 1, and you can understand 1 without 2. But I think there is something interesting about having both of them. So for 130 years, nobody knew what happened to Nora. Nobody knew what happened to Torvald and the children. Playing Nora, Tiffany, was that at all? Was the second play an impact on you working on the first play, or were you just sort of focused on this slice of her life?
I mostly focused on her slice of life. I know that Carrie and I talked, but it was a lot more for Carrie.
Nora in A Doll's House Part 2.
And I mean, like I said, we had a couple of discussions about what happened to Nora within those 15 years, but it didn't necessarily, because her life honestly is a 360 from the beginning of A Doll's House 1 to the end of A Doll's House 1, and that springboards into what A Doll's House 2 is. But I mean, she came to watch, and we talked a little bit about mannerisms or the tarantella that I do. She kind of learned some of the steps herself so that she could kind of use that a little bit in A Doll's House too to inform that.
We had an interesting conversation just now with Ashley Maxwell and Carrie Scram of A Doll's House Part 2. Ashley Schaefer, excuse me.
Daughter-in-law of Maxwell.
Mr. Schaefer.
That's important. That's important to know.
Do you want to do that over again, or let's just
an interesting conversation. Yeah, I can cut that last part out. Interesting conversation.
No, but stay in.
Schaefer and Carrie Scram of A Doll's House Part 2. And one of the interesting things from her was Ashley said she stole things from you a little bit, that she picked things from Nora to influence playing Nora's daughter as an adult in the second piece. Some of those mannerisms. Nora hasn't been there for 15 years,
right.
But there would be some of that stuff that would come through.
What was interesting was actually last year when we did the staged readings, I actually read Nora from A Doll's House, and then I read Emmy in A Doll's House Part 2 when we did the staged readings, and those perspectives are quite different. But I mean, it kind of reminds me that even people who are strayed from each other from years apart might still have some similar mannerisms that you might feel so that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that she did that, but I think that's that's much more realistic in a way, because sometimes you innately just take things from even subtle phantom memories that you have of someone, and because that's all you can hang on to.
So we're doing this in the Stoner Theater of Des Moines Performing Arts, and doing both shows in rep, so we're on the same set. The Stoner itself, if folks haven't been there, is an interesting it's a sort of a shallow thrust space. Ibsen, as we talked about, was an innovator in his day for the realism that he brought to the stage. But that was all proscenium stages, so it's a very different kind of environment than how we're doing these. Talk a little bit about the set and what sort of thought process, or if there was anything that changed for you about having people on three sides of that set, and what the environment of the play, because you're in the Helmer's home for both shows. It's obviously anybody's home, particularly a home in which you're raising kids, is kind of a emotionally fraught place. What was that like? What was some of the discussion or impacts around that?
Well, J.J.'s set is fabulous. I mean, he has walls that create, we're very loud in this space, we've got a little extra sounds. What was great is that he created these kind of short walls that really pen in the space, and so we really do get kind of a cage setup. And for me, I think the fact that we're in a thrust allows them to actually experience the realism more than if we're always saying we're going to open up to this one audience. And so I think it's a compressed space. It's tight in some spots, but it doesn't feel overly tight. We have room to actually spread people apart sometimes when there's that kind of tension. I think of it kind of as a dance, as they're moving through the space, when they're trying to move in and out. And we kind of, and whether we kept it, wow, it's really loud out there, whether we kept it or not, there's sort of, when they get particularly tense, they become much more like caged-in animals. So if you look at moments where Nora is like moving around the space, she's caged in. When we look at Torvald's kind of last breakdown, he's very much like an animal in a cage who doesn't know how to get out. So the space is great. I mean, and it's just, it looks really good, which is important, but I think it operates really well for the actors.
Well, we are doing these in rep. Were there any sort of what are the challenges in doing that? I mean, because you have to use the same stage as Jody, right? I mean, was there a lot of Jody Jenks, who is directing Doll's House too? Was there a lot? Did you have to compromise a lot?
Well, no? It really was Jay who really established the world, and that was kind of like, okay, can we get on board with this? Because he also knew how to work in this space, because it's that weird sort of it's somewhat weird shallow thrust, but he knew how to work in that space, and so the notion was, how can you really tell these two different stories within this one space? And for me, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Sorry.
A great moment.
Just for people out there, there's an open house sort of thing, but we're
moving through that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was necessarily compromise. I got a space that I could put human beings in and put actors in, so for me it was no compromise. I don't know, hers was more abstract, but what Jay did is he really strips it down. So even though it's the same set, it's also not the same set. And I think it sets up a different dynamic when you walk in. So the Helmer's home looks kind of nice and cozy, right? There's your line, right? Isn't it cozy in here? But it's really stark when everything goes away.
Yeah.
15 years later. So I think the space is, Jay gave us places to people for to be intimate with each other, to move apart. I knew I wanted the chaise. I did ask him for something like that because I just knew we needed a place where people didn't have anything physically between them.
Right.
And that's kind of when we use that space. And then Nora, you sort of claimed that as your space.
The chaise is my happy place.
That's right.
And also, we talked about Jay Jagham's fascinating set design. We've got Susanna Douthit doing some really great costumes. And you guys slid the period of the piece a little bit, didn't you? The time frame?
Well, that's
from a costume perspective.
I think we probably don't want to talk about that necessarily, because it's sort of the notion of it being kind of an amorphous time. It's still, we didn't change. I don't even know this program say 1879. It's just that there's a little bit more fluidity in terms of the costumes. Nobody's going to think it's a different time period. We didn't move it up 15, 20 years. It's just men's suits always basically look the same from that era.
Right.
Similar kind of thing, and it brings a certain rigor to the costuming for women, of course, because the clothing for women at that time was...
We're still wearing the corsets and the bustles.
Corsets and bustles.
And bustles.
The best day was when your shawl got stuck on your bustle. This was after Shawn had put the cane on your bustle, and then
I put a when? When did I do that?
and then I waddled
right,
away.
Well, it's a lot like a shelf.
It
Like,
is.
It's,
It
yeah,
is.
It's literally.
So a bustle, for those who may not know, is a piece of women's clothing that extends out the back, and
It's kind of like a pad or like a pillow that you've kind of tied. Yeah, a butt shelf. Yeah, and you tie it around your waist, so when you put a skirt over it, it kind of makes it look like your behind is a little bit more robust, and it does kind of look like a shelf.
Well, and the cane went on the shelf, but then
Just to see if it would stay. I think we could
It
get
did
like
stay.
a
I
large
walked
screen
around. I walked away.
television.
You had to come and try to grab it back.
Right, yeah. I think we get like a large screen television on there. I've had like a whole entertainment
I
console.
see a performance piece coming up.
So, but how as
on
an
the
actor,
bustle, not on you.
yeah,
That's
as
so
an
bad.
actor, how does that level of physical change affect your presence on stage, your feeling on stage? I mean, do you feel a difference when you get in the costume, when you get in the? Did you have like a
I'm
rehearsal
sure Jennifer
corset?
can attest that I walked in and presented myself very differently when I started wearing that corset. So I think that physically, yeah, I mean, it creates a definite. I want to say, I mean, it's rigid. It is rigid, so it kind of creates. But that's the time. So I mean, it helps with keeping the more physicality as opposed to what I would do, which is probably be a lot more free with my, free. But it keeps me a little bit more still, and so I think it helps inform the character and the time period that it.
But it's
written.
rough. Like you can't breathe sometimes. You
And
have
then
do
trying
like
to
a
dance
huge
and spin around.
Right.
Yeah,
And of course,
oxygen is optional.
So,
Jennifer had me wear a corset in the show in college because my pastor was so bad.
I think men need to wear corsets as well.
I'm
if
wearing
women
one
are.
right
it's
now.
a,
Appreciate it.
it's a unique
Honestly.
experience. When you've had that opportunity, you really don't forget what that feels like physically. We also should mention Jim Tremper is doing some really interesting stuff with the lights. The mood and the look of the piece is terrific. Well, thank you so much, guys. We appreciate your time. We
Thank you
appreciate
guys
your
for
work
coming
on the
in.
show. We're excited for
Thank
people
you.
to see the show, and if they're catching this after the show, I hope you saw it, because if not, you really missed out. That's A Doll's House, happening at the Stoner Theater of Des Moines Performing Arts, opening September 27th, closing on the 12th of October.
Yep.
And you can check out tickets and the whole season at iowastage.org. So, Jennifer Nostrala, Tiffany Flory, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Glad to be here.
guys.
Thanks.
All right. This has been Iowa Stages, a podcast about Central Iowa theater from the Iowa Stage Theater Company.